All right. Well, welcome to another episode of Blazin, Grazin, and Other Wild Things. Today we have the privilege of having Dr. Amy Hagerman with us. Amy is the Extension Specialist for Agriculture and Food Policy here at Oklahoma State in the Agricultural Economic Department. Amy, thank you and glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Well, Amy, we always kind of start out with people, wanting to know a little bit about yourself and, kind of maybe where you're from and your journeys to get to where you are.
Oh, it was a wild ride.
That's what we do is wild things.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm originally from Western Oklahoma. Grew up on a crops and livestock. We had some outdoor swine for a while.
Whereabouts?
Outside of Hydro.
Oh, okay.
So I graduated from a teeny tiny little school called Lokiba Sickles. If anybody's heard of that one. I got a whopping class of 23 before coming to Oklahoma State and get an Ag Econ degree. And that's really where I knew that was my space, was markets and trade and agribusiness, that kind of thing. Yep. So did grad school in Texas, at Texas A&M. And said I would never work for USDA, and then I turn around and worked 7 years.
Yeah, don't we always love the I will nevers,
I will right?
Never.
Never say nevers anymore.
Yeah.
I spent 7 years with USDA, and when the opportunity came to come back home, come back to my roots and work with the producers in Oklahoma in 2018, I grabbed it.
You bet. Well, that's great. That's great. And now you're working with, again, agriculture and food policy, and a lot of that is working with disaster.
Absolutely. Yeah, a huge chunk of the policies, like where we need real policy intervention, is when something unexpected happens, something you can't really plan for in your production. And you've done everything you can, and, still you're experiencing really intensive losses associated with it. That could be drought, that could be fire, it could be flood. We also think about the market events, too, these unexpected market events that rapidly impact markets. And that's where policy kind of comes into play. And so I'm helping producers understand what kinds of record keeping, what kinds of preparedness they need to have in place before something happens, what the program is and what the program isn't, and whether it applies in their situation, and then how to actually apply for those programs and use them.
And most of these programs and policy programs and stuff are federal programs, but there are some probably state programs.
There are some state ones too. So if we think about drought, we've had the Emergency Drought Commission that's been very active in Oklahoma and helping for things like water well drilling, cleaning out ponds whenever they're dry, and even thinking about policies like cedar tree management here in the state. That's been a state push that we've had here.
Yep. It's interesting. We always talk about, to me, I think about it, and sometimes this stuff aggravates me because it's good policy, but a lot of times they don't initiate that policy until after the fact. And it's like, Ben Franklin was right. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure by a long ways. Why? And why are we always so reactive instead of being proactive with stuff that we do? That's just
yeah. A lot of the incentives are for more recovery programs for offsetting the losses, and the producer really bears the weight of those losses until that reimbursement happens, and that can be a year or two down the line. There are some conservation programs you're aware of that you can use for some preventive activities, but by and large, it's really up to the producer to identify what those prevention things are, and unfortunately, a lot of the cost falls on them as well. And right now, where just costs of production are very high, it's hard to find the margin to be able to invest in some of those activities. Like, you can see the importance of it, but then, do you actually have the bandwidth financially to do it?
Yeah. And what agencies are typically most involved with a lot of these type of programs?
So if we're talking about more sort of the proactive type policies, there you're really talking about Natural Resource and Conservation Service. If you're talking about more the reactive, the recovery programs, that's usually the Farm Service Agency, although NRCS still has some activities there. I'll also say that, a lot of homes get involved as well. And so we can't ignore the insurance agent industry, the trends that are happening in the insurance industry, and how that affects our resilience, our ability to bounce back overall.
Yeah. And that's really and truly what a lot of that is about, is how resilient as a producer, as a landowner, can my property be.
Yes, absolutely.
Of getting that. And, I mean, I guess that may be a good thing to lead into, because you and I have worked a little bit together on some wildfire preparedness type stuff. Again, some of that prevention, hopefully we can prevent some wildfire damages on our property, or keep them at a minimum, or whatever we can keep it down to. And maybe that'd be a good thing we could talk about that, especially, we are in wildfire season. We've had quite a few wildfires popping up around the state of Oklahoma and the region here within the last few weeks and stuff. And so, kind of go into that and talk about, what as a landowner, homeowner, what can we do to help prevent some of that stuff? And
I think there are the things we can physically do to get ready, and there are also just the things we can track and monitor and watch as well. So the things we can physically do, you and I worked on a great checklist for people that they can go through, and they can say, okay, around my house, around my barns, around my property, these are the things that I can do. And we try, through the disaster assistance response team, we try to promote those really heavily on our social media as we're coming into sort of these red flag warning days. These are the things you can do that you can be better prepared and protect your home and protect your barn, protect your hay, right? Protect your equipment. I grew up on one of those farms. Like, we pulled the equipment out into sort of this grown-up patch that was over here by the barn, and you park it until you need it again. I grew up on one of those places, and I think about it, I was like, you could have just brush hogged that, Grandpa. What were we doing, right?
And a lot of times we didn't clean that equipment off. We either had, hydraulic hose busted and saturated things down, so that, and then we got maybe residual forage or something that's on there.
A thick layer of grass on the back of the bush hog.
Oh, yeah.
All that stuff. And I mean,
normal.
But those are things that we have to really think about and to be prepared with that. Yeah, the best thing to do with just like we said with equipment, best place to park it somewhere bare ground. Gravel lots, bare ground. But if you don't have that, mow it down as short as it can, so at least you don't have 4-foot flames coming at it. It got 4-inch flames that may burn just right underneath it, no problem, and reduce any kind of impacts. But it's just those little things to do that. The problem is it's human nature, and we're all. I'm that way. We're all that way.
Oh yeah.
That we think about it, and we probably know what we should do, but getting out there and actually doing it is the.
And that's the big thing with any mitigation plan. I can look around my operation. I can think about the risks I'm likely to face. I can identify those high-risk areas where I know I could potentially have a big loss associated with it. But do I land the plane? Do I take that and turn it into action? Things like breaking my hay up into multiple holding locations, not having all my eggs in one basket. Things like mowing down or graveling that area. Things like cleaning the trees out of my fence line. Am I actually doing those things? And I understand, we only have so much time. And when your job, not to use the term putting out fires, I'm going to try to avoid that. But when you're trying to deal with today's crisis every single day, it's just really hard to get around to some of those preventive activities. But like you said, that ounce of prevention can save a lot of cost when something does eventually happen.
Yeah, and you hate to see that, when losses that people take within that, but also you really hate to see it when you look at it and go, man, that could have been prevented, or probably not as bad as what we thought it was. If they'd have just pulled that away from the house, or don't park it next to that, like you said, don't put all your hay, and then they get into those kind of situations, and I think that's where some of the insurance companies may have come. They can step in. They have helped with making people at least think about stuff. There is some of the insurance companies that do that. They'll only insure for a certain number of bales of hay in one area, so you can't stack everything in one spot and expect to get insurance to pay to recover from that. They're only going to pay for X number of bales in that spot, so you definitely need to spread that stuff around. So
and that's why it's so important to make that annual appointment with your insurance agent and really talk to them about what's changed on your operation. If you've got an agent that's coming out and looking, walking around with you, making sure your coverage is the right coverage for what you have, that's really important. That's just one of those annual good maintenance checklists. It's just like maintenance on anything else, right? You maintain your insurance annually too.
Yeah, and I mean that's what you're paying for too, is for that assistance. So don't feel bad about trying to bring them out there to do that. No, that's a great idea, because a lot of times I think we just get so used to the same insurance and doing everything's fine. We don't
autopilot.
Yep. Again, we don't need it, so we're not thinking about it and doing it. But a lot of times, a lot of people's policies are pretty old, and so they don't have the right amount of coverage to meet today's cost, right?
Yes, absolutely. And thinking about, like, you make any kind of improvement, you put up a new barn, you buy a new piece of equipment, those are things your insurance agent needs to know, because that's what determines whether you've got the right kind of coverage, the right level of coverage.
Yeah, because you may have caps on certain things, and you have reached that cap real quick anymore, especially with today's prices.
Oh, for sure. Especially in a real catastrophic loss situation. You're not talking about the loss of a thing on your property. You're going to hit your deductible really fast and be in that catastrophic loss category.
Do you have any good examples of folks? I'm sure you've got lots of folks that you may have worked with or know of that dealt with and did a good job navigating post-fire. But do you have any good examples of folks that you've worked with that really took reasonable prevention steps and it made a big difference in terms of their loss and what they ended up dealing with?
I think there are a few examples that you could point to. Honestly, you don't hear about those as often. Yeah. Right? Because they kept rolling.
Yep.
They were able to recover. They were more resilient. They were able to recover more quickly, and they kept rolling. But I have had producers who are like, well, I lost some hay, but I don't keep all my hay in one place, and so I'm still able to feed my cattle. Or, man, when that fire burned through a couple of years ago, I took the opportunity when I put my fences back in to keep my fence rows really clean. And so even though that fire burned through that pasture, I'm not going to have to replace a bunch of fence because I kept it from sitting under my fence and burning. And so it's almost it's just another fire. Right at that point, it becomes, it's just another fire. Yep. I've got that bare ground. I knew the route I was going to push my cattle onto that bare ground to provide protections for them. They just bounce and keep moving more so in those situations.
Now, that makes sense, and it just seems like today, I mean, the average lifespan of a rancher in a lot of parts of the Great Plains, I mean, you're going to deal with a fire event, and the question is whether or not it was something you were able to bounce back from or not.
Yeah.
And I've noticed, I've worked with a lot of landowners and stuff, and some again, it's just like everything. Some take it harder than others.
Absolutely.
Again, certain things, that's just human nature. But also being that resilient to the action. Some of it's a traumatic experience.
I think it's always traumatic. But if the things you can do to recover feel achievable, does that make sense? Then, like, if you've reduced the amount of work you have to do to recover by taking some steps ahead of time, it feels more achievable to recover, and it isn't so overwhelming. It's always bad. There's no situation where you take major damages that you're like, oh, well, that was no big deal. But you can feel like the actions are doable going forward.
I always try to, I deal with fire, all prescribed fire and fire, and I know the effects. I've seen the effects of it for years and stuff. And, what I try to tell people too, the land is resilient. It will come back. Our lands are adapted to fire. They've been burning for centuries, and they've burned under very extreme conditions that are probably more extreme than we've ever even seen. Even on some of our extremist wildfires, we've probably had fires across the Great Plains and across your property under those extreme days. And, it's come back. It's, that's what I like to tell people is, go out to your property and just go somewhere and stop, look down at the ground that you're standing on, and think about it, that piece of ground is probably burned every day of the year through time. And it's still there. It's not down to bedrock. It's not going to blow away. It's not going to erode away.
Yeah.
It's still there and doing that. So the land's resilient. It'll bounce back. It's the personal property that people lose that's always the hardest and the most tragic within that. But if we could just take a little bit of preparedness and time to think about some of that stuff, think about, especially outbuildings and stuff. I know a lot of times we always in our shops and barns we leave the doors open all the time because it's just easy to go in. But during that time of year, you want to lock them things down, shut them doors, keep don't give ember or fire a way to get in those buildings and stuff. Keep all the doors closed and shut. Make sure you got stuff mowed or grazed down. Just like in your equipment yard, if you can't mow it, throw a couple of head of cattle in there every once in a while. Let them graze in the equipment yard and grub everything down, and stomp it down and graze it down where it's not going to be a problem. Just those little bit of things. And then we hate to hear the tragedy of somebody getting hurt or losing or even losing a life because they're trying to rescue something that really isn't worth it in the long run.
Right. Yeah, doing those last minute, last ditch efforts to save property or things like that. And so, if they have those preparedness things done ahead of time, it really makes a huge difference. I think about debris under porches. That's one thing that always really struck me as you and I talked, is putting in those barriers around your porches, keeping debris from getting up in there. Just thinking about your evacuation checklist too. Yeah. Like you said, personal safety is first and foremost here. Yeah. And what is your evacuation plan? Your family, your loved ones, your pets, making sure you've got the stuff you need.
Yep. And we've talked about that in our checklists and stuff too. Where are your personal, papers? Where are those important papers, things like that? Where are they stored at? Are they in a fireproof safe in the house? Are they in a safety deposit box in a bank? Are they somewhere that, hey, we can grab them pretty quick and take them with us if need be? Even thoughts on medications?
Absolutely. That's really essential. You need to have at least a couple of days worth of essentials because let's say you get evacuated, even if you're not going to lose your home as a result of it. If you get evacuated, you got to be able to make it through that evacuation period and then be able to get back. And man, our cell phones, that extra cell phone charger in your bag. Yeah. Do any of us know a phone number anymore?
Yeah, no.
And everybody's going to be contacting us.
But that's about it.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Everybody's going to be contacting us wanting to know that we're okay. Yeah. And so just being able to have, an extra charger for your cell phone, something you can plug into your vehicle or, anything like that. That's really critical.
Yeah, so people can.
Little things.
It is a lot of the little things to keep safe within that. Going back to preparedness, again, like we said, there has been some pretty big wildfires here in the last week here in Oklahoma into Kansas and stuff. What are some things, some programs, or what are some things that are probably coming up or that people might need to know about of where they can get help? I mean, I guess another thing is, what are things people need to do? I know a lot of people have insurance.
Yeah.
So what would be some good advice for people? What kind of information do I need to have so I can make a claim and do that and make it as painless as possible. You know, I hear a lot of things about it's really good to take your cell phone and take pictures or take video of your house, barn, equipment, so that you've got proof and that you know exactly what are some things like that we probably should do, besides also contacting our agent and getting a visit and making sure everything's up to date?
You know, that's contacting your agent is really the first step after something happens, because in most cases, they have to come out and visually document it before they can start the claim process for you. And you can't clean anything up until they've done that. That's important. It's natural. Like, we want to immediately go out and start cleaning things up, but it really needs to be documented. And depending on the program, sometimes photos or video that are taken by you and submitted are completely fine for that documentation process. But usually for insurance, they want someone to actually come out there and look at the damage, the insurance adjuster, right, to document that damage before you begin the cleanup process. Safety things, absolutely. We're making sure there's no live embers, you know, all of those things. But in terms of like taking down damaged structures or taking out damaged fence line, you really need to have that, make sure that somebody doesn't need to come out and physically see it before you do that. And that's just a call, right? That's just a quick call. Hey, I've got some damage. Do you want to send somebody out to look at it?
Possibly livestock.
Absolutely.
Hay.
Usually livestock and hay videos and photographs are sufficient typically for hay. But if fence lines, usually NRCS for that emergency conservation program, they want somebody to actually come out and look at the damage. Now, that doesn't mean you can't run a hot wire inside of that fence line and still have access to that broader pasture. But that you want to make sure you know the procedures for whatever the program is.
Okay. So what are some of the programs that are possibly, has there been any talk about anything? I know there's some that are pretty standard that they bring them up. You just have to, I guess, get a disaster declared.
So some of them don't even need a disaster declared. That's the interesting thing. So if you look at the livestock indemnity program for the cattle that have died because of a fire, it doesn't require a disaster declaration. If you receive a loss of cattle that's higher than your normal mortality on your operation, you can apply for the LIP program. And that's, you want to call your FSA office, your Farm Service Agency office, make a notice of loss, and say, hey, I lost some cattle due to a wildfire, which will be a qualifying event. Documentation of that. You also need your records ahead of time. This is another one of those preparedness things, because you have to prove that you own the cattle. It's pretty easy for stocker cattle, but for our cow-calf operations, you need some kind of proof that you own those cows ahead of the event. So again, documentation, really essential. Making sure that documentation is someplace that you can access it. Very essential.
And it didn't get burned up.
And that it didn't get burned up. Exactly. So that's some of those records you might want to digitize and have them where you can get to them.
Just have them stored on cloud type deal, or hard drive that's able to move or somewhere.
So livestock indemnity program is usually your go-to program if you have cattle or other kinds of livestock losses due to a fire. If it's your fence line, it's the emergency conservation program. This one's a little bit different. So emergency conservation program is through Farm Service Agency, but they have to activate it at the county level. So it's not available all year round like livestock indemnity program is. The county committee is going to say, hey, we've had a local disaster. We are going to start taking applications for the emergency conservation program. They're going to come out and look at your damages, and they're going to determine, can your fence line be repaired? Does it need to be replaced? How many miles? And it's a cost share program. So generally it's the producer is responsible for up to a certain level, and then they submit their receipts, again, documentation, to be reimbursed for that program to repair their fence line. So that's another important one. Hay hauling. We do have hay hauling and hay loss eligibility under the Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish. It's the ELAP program. The acronym does not match the name of the program. But it's the ELAP program. Yep. And so that's one that requires a lot of documentation. And it's got to be pretty specific documentation. So making sure you understand what those rules are going into it as well. And that's a conversation, again, with your Farm Service Agency office to kind of get that kicked off.
With those cost share programs, is it typically, full reimbursement or not? I figured not.
Yeah, you can think of it sort of like a deductible. On those programs. There is a portion of the total cost that you'll be responsible to, and that varies county to county. That is set by the county committee on what they'll pay up to.
And there is a cap typically put on those, and I think the last cap I noticed on the emergency conservation program was $500,000 to an individual landowner total.
Yes.
And on some of it, like on fencing, the last one I saw or worked with in Texas they were reimbursing up to 75%, and the landowner was responsible for 25%. But they also, on those, they have a set rate at that fence. You can't. So if you think your fence is, you want to build a high dollar fence, they're only going to pay a certain amount per mile. No matter what.
It's fixed.
Yes,
it's fixed what they will pay up to. Now, that doesn't mean you can't build the fence that you want to build, but you'll be responsible for that additional cost.
Right. On that. Another thing I think gets in there a lot of times is water, because you can get damage to solar and doing that.
That's going to fall under that ELAP program. And then also hauling water to your cattle will fall under that as well. So if you have to set up a temporary watering facility somewhere and you have to haul water to that temporary watering facility, that will be covered under that program as well.
Yep. What about, again, you've also worked not only with the, these policies and these agencies and stuff that do that, but also a lot of times when we have crisis, whether it be fire, tornado, flood in the state and around, people just want to help. Neighbor wants to help neighbor. That is an Oklahoma deal. We help each other out and doing that. And then is there things set up? Do you work with that too about, is there certain groups that set up things or to get things to help people out in this time of need?
Yeah, there are several groups that have funds that they use to help. And they're set up as charities. They're qualifying charities. So anything donated to them is tax deductible. And then you also have private individuals who will set up as a distribution center. And so they never really take ownership of any donated supplies like hay or something like that. They immediately funnel those out. And so it's really a person-to-person donation in that case. And I would say one thing to be aware of, we get a lot of questions about the tax implications, both of receiving disaster payments as somebody who's been affected by a fire, but then also about donations. Yeah. What are the tax implications of donations? And it's really important to talk to your tax preparer ahead of time because it's unique to the situation. But sometimes those donations of, for example, hay from person to person are not tax deductible for the donation itself. They can donate the costs that went into the production of the hay, but they can't necessarily write off the value of that hay that was donated. And so it's really important to talk to your tax preparer ahead of time because you may go into it thinking it's got one kind of implication for your taxes and it doesn't. It's another. Generally, any kind of donation made directly through one of these charities is a tax-deductible charitable contribution.
Do you have any advice on which, I'm not saying name names, but what would you look for a good charity or organization to donate to?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is how much of the money or goods that are being donated are going directly to the people that are impacted. I think that's a really, really important part of this overall. And they should be saying right up front exactly how much is going out to people. I think also like the kinds of things that they're donating to. Are they directly like focused on Oklahoma agriculture? Is it broader things? Like, what is it? And most of our bigger organizations and associations in the state have some kind of charitable arm. Think of the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association Foundation. The Oklahoma Farm Bureau has a foundation. American Farmers and Ranchers has a charitable foundation. And so you think of those are just examples, right? You can think of any of our big organizations in the state. They probably have a charitable arm that digs in and helps when something happens.
They're probably 501c3 organizations and stuff. So they're not just set up last night. They've been set up, and they're
and they put in an annual report that says this is how I have spent these funds that have been donated. It's being done responsibly. It's under IRS oversight to make sure that they're responsibly distributing those funds.
Yep. Well, you mentioned it earlier about the DART. If you want to go into a little bit of that, because that's another group helping out.
Does that acronym actually hold out to be what it says it is?
So it is the Disaster Assistance Response Team.
Well, there you go.
There we go.
And so, yes, that's an acronym that matches.
It needs fish in there.
Yeah.
It's just some farm-raised fish for disaster assistance for farm-raised fish.
Yeah, there we go.
That's,
we could be draft.
Hey, aquaculture is important, too. We've got a good aquaculture industry here in Oklahoma. But yeah, the Disaster Assistance Response Team is designed to come alongside county educators and help them walk through this situation. We had talked about neighbors helping neighbors. That's really what this is. It's the Extension Oklahoma Standard application of neighbors helping neighbors and making sure that educators have access to timely resources and other educators that have been through this before to come alongside them, help them answer their producers' questions. So much of this is we've walked this ground before, for better or worse, in multiple counties in the state. We've walked this ground before. And being able to connect people who have walked that ground before with somebody who's walking it for the first time is really powerful. The other thing we can do is lift a little burden off of those local educators' shoulders by bringing some of the, I need an answer to this question. Let's punt that to somebody who isn't busy answering phone calls about hay donations to go find the answer for you on that. And so it's really kind of a grassroots effort to come alongside and support our extension efforts in the state, because extension plays such an essential role. We talk about the insurance agents and we talk about these different agencies. Extension is the group that is there with them in the years ahead of recovery, of rebuilding their operation, maybe reimagining, right? So that they're better on the other side of this and what their operation looks like, coming up with new strategies to prevent that kind of disaster from happening in the future. That's where extension lives. We are more of the proactive arm in that recovery phase, because that's disaster response. It's a big circle, right? We respond and then we recover, but then we go straight back into preparedness and mitigation to come back around. And extension lives over here in preparedness and mitigation, recovery, preparedness, and mitigation. That's where we shine. So our goal is to equip our educators to help people play that role in their own operation and, frankly, within our own system. Thinking about our offices and our farms and how can we help our people be more resilient and help our people to recover after some kind of event happens that affects a county office or a field unit.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because extension it's been around for decades long, and a lot of times most of those agents and educators are embedded in that community. They have ties and things, and so they're affected just as much as that. Because also their people that they serve and help are affected, and
it's their friends and neighbors.
You bet.
Yeah.
But also they've got a lot of times they got their finger on the pulse of things, know where they can get stuff, and to do that, and that's important to have that information and to help people to get on that road to recovery and help out with those kind of things.
Yeah, and then they can tap into those resources in the broader state, the broader community, across the nation, right? They can tap into those national resources because Extension is a national network.
Yeah. Yeah, it did. Yeah, it's national. And because there's a Extension office right across the state line into the next county most of the time,
And these fires don't respect state lines or county lines. It's so rude of them.
Yeah, it is. They just don't stop.
They don't stop. They just keep going. It's like, don't you know you just hit the state line? You can't cross over.
Yeah, you can't go over here.
You're going to need a certificate of veterinary inspection to cross over here.
You're going to have to dip you before you go across to make sure you don't have any kind of problems with that. So, is there anything else that you'd have to ask, to any kind of information you have to landowners, anybody that's been affected by any kind of disaster, maybe what to watch out for, and if you are looking for a place, where can we turn to for help? What are some different, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of what to watch out for, because we've still got some fire season ahead of us this spring, I think that there's some great resources and maps online that you can watch to know when danger is high and know when not to do certain activities. Whether you're welding fence or whatever it is, there's things you can monitor and watch, good tools from Mesonet, for example, that are great tools to watch for. So having those just at your fingertip, making it muscle memory to check those things before you do certain activities, I think that's really critical. The documentation, if you don't have your documentation in place right now and you're listening to this podcast, go get your documentation in place because your future self will thank you for it. And then just in terms of recovery, I would say know what those rules are for those different programs. We've got some fact sheets online about disaster recovery programs that talk about what different programs can be used for. Know what they are ahead of time so that if something does happen on your operation, large or small, if one of those programs can actually be a help to you to recover from it. So those are the biggest things, I think, is just documentation. One last thing, I can't get off of a conversation like this without talking about monitoring your mental health when something like this happens. We mentioned it. These are, whether it's a large event or a small event, it's stressful. It's incredibly stressful. And when you're in the moment and the adrenaline is pumping and you're in that recovery moment, it may not feel like that much stress. It's when you're all finished and it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 6 months later, and then it just hits you. And you're like, why? Why do I feel like junk? Why do I not want to go do anything? And you gotta think about like that you really did go through something and your body doesn't forget it.
Yep.
And it's going to come back and tell you about it. So I think it's really important to understand sort of those signs that your mental health is strained pretty hard in yourself and then also in your neighbors.
Yeah.
Listening and understanding, not being afraid to ask somebody, are you okay?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's where it comes into being definitely a good spouse, good neighbor, keeping tabs on your others, and because don't feel like the Lone Ranger out there. The other people in the community went through the same thing. Some went through it worse, some went through it not as much, but everybody went through that. Even if people didn't lose anything, it still went through it because they saw the effects of it. They saw their neighbors going through it. So, don't be scared to ask people for assistance. Don't be scared to ask people how they're doing and visit with them.
I'm seeing it here in Stillwater and going into March of 2026. You're hearing people talk about the stress that's coming back in them after the experience in March of 2025. It's not a short-term thing. This is something that's a long-term thing you've got to watch for.
Yeah. I dealt with we go to church. My kids graduated, went to school at Mulhall, Orlando, and so when Mulhall was hit in 1999 by the tornado May 3rd, we lived through that. We didn't we lost nothing personal of our own, except we saw the trauma and went through that with our friends, and and people that we know in
Yeah.
Mulhall that went through that. And so, that years.
Yeah.
It was years. With people. And again, everybody's still, and it's still on people's minds. It still is. And that's, 7 years, this year coming up, be 27 years ago.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff is still there. And so, don't be scared to not talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And give yourself some grace.
Yeah.
Yeah, give yourself some grace. It's the thing I hear a lot of Oklahomans saying. You're gonna know exactly what I say when I say this. I didn't want to be a bother.
Yeah.
It's like, be a bother. Be a bother.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody.
Yeah. Talk to somebody, but be a bother, and don't be scared to talk to your neighbor and say, "Hey, are you doing okay?"
Yes.
Because I'm not really doing great. I was just wondering how you were
just
doing.
wondering if you're not doing great too.
Because I was always told that panic loves company. Well, a lot of things love company.
Stress loves company.
Stress loves company. So it's good to talk about it and get it over with. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's what helps us as a community draw closer together.
Yeah,
is when we have those conversations.
Yeah. And it does show how good and resilient you are by people helping each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. All right. Anything else, Amy?
I think on that cheerful note, I will say there's nothing else.
Nothing else. Mark, you got any comments or words of wisdom?
I think this has been enlightening for folks that hopefully have not gone through anything yet, just thinking about ways they can be prepared, but also hopefully this good resource for folks that need some more information. If anybody wants to look up fact sheets or anything like that, what are some good resources and where can they find it?
So we have an emergency and disaster resource page through OSU Extension. That's a great place to start. There's a lot of short reads, short videos that people can look up. Also, you can reach out to your county educator and ask them, hey, I heard there's this checklist. Where is that? Where can I go find that? So that's another great resource to reach out to. And then just us. I mean, I'm fine. People just reach out to me and ask me questions.
Yep. And we will post all those links and stuff to the fact sheets, different stuff on our Grazin, Blazin, and Other Wild Things website. So you can get links to that as well on doing that. Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Even though we're not talking about everybody's favorite topic or anything, but it's a topic that we need to talk about. It's a topic that also hopefully we get some information out to people that need it. And hopefully we've got it to where people can get prepared and maybe get up out of your chair and let's go just prepare a little bit.
Right.
It'll go a
Pick
long
one
way.
thing. Pick one really impactful thing, and it's going to be a beautiful weekend. Pick one impactful thing and get her done this weekend.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you. And that's it for another episode of Blazin', Grazin', and Other Wild Things.